Well, to talk more about the prospects of a deal with Iran and more broadly about how far these protests might go, we're joined by Jason Brodsky. He's the Policy Director at United Against a Nuclear Iran. Good evening to you. And in Manama, Bahrain tonight, we're joined by Abdullah Al-Junaid. He's economist and geopolitical analyst as well. Good evening to you as well, Abdullah. And Jason, I'll start with you if I may. I mean, is the US really going to still pursue this nuclear agreement with Iran, given what is going on in the streets right now?
It's great to be with you, Laura. I do think that the Biden administration will still continue to pursue the nuclear deal, but it has yet to resolve the fundamental contradiction inherent in that approach, where any deal that is reached with the Islamic Republic to revive the JCPOA will inevitably resource the same institutions and individuals who are oppressing the Iranian people and who they are protesting against right now. And unless and until the E3 and the U.S. Develop a broader Iran strategy to counter all of this behavior in its totality, we're going to continue to have the same problems.
Abdullah, what are your thoughts? Do you think a deal with Iran would legitimize the regime at this point?
Put it this way, since the launch of those talks, what did it achieve except legitimizing or re-institutionalize this fascist regime internationally? This is exactly the fact. The United States has driven this whole momentum or a track into a dead-end alley. They can't reverse back and they can't go forward. And who is paying the price? The Iranian, us, and the rest of the world.
I want to ask you about the protests, Abdullah. We're coming up to 2 weeks of some of the biggest protests in Iran since 2019 at least. Do you think that they are different? Do you think that these protests could spell the end of the regime?
Put it this way, I think mentally this regime has fallen. It's not any longer represent anything to the hearts of mind of the Iranian, especially the youth who haven't been part of this, what took events, okay? So for them, it's not just a matter of generational gap. There is no connection. This regime has no grassroots or support. It has failed socially, economically, and for the Iranian, everywhere they go, they are branded being what? A citizen of a fascist or terrorist supporting regime. They do need a change. It will take place, but we have to be patient. It's only the Iranians that are going to affect that change, but we need to support them in every which way possible.
Jason, if I could bring you in here, because the forced hijab, the forced wearing of the veil was, of course, the trigger for these protests, and women are leading the protests on the street. We can bring up some graphics, I think, of just how bad the situation is for women in Iran, not just the compulsory veil, but many other discriminatory laws which are baked into the penal code in Iran. I think we can take a look at that. I mean, is there something different for you this time, Jason, and in the way that women are leading the protests?
Well, I think what's different this time around are a number of factors, most especially the Iranians actually fighting back. We are seeing scenes of protesters torching police cars, throwing incendiary devices at law enforcement forces in Iran that we really haven't seen in previous iterations of the protest. And they are chanting not just against the forced hijab, they are chanting against the regime itself. They are saying and trying to telegraph to the world that this regime is incapable of reform, it's illegitimate, and the international community, namely the U.S. and the E3, need to stop legitimizing it by giving it resources in the form of sanctions relief.
And Abdullah, that is different, isn't it, to what we've seen in the past? Because in the West, certainly under the Biden administration, there seems to have been a desire to negotiate with the more moderate elements of that regime. Do you think the protests have kind of put that to rest, that kind of thinking?
Well, Laura, I mean, put it this way. When people talk about moderate and hardliners in Iran, I fail to say or to see, and I promise you the whole world, and especially the Iranian, had failed to see any modernism or moderate within this regime. There is no moderate faction or otherwise. It is one dictatorship run by a dictator. That dictator is Ali Khamenei. And just as a follow-up to what Jason have said, I think one of the opposition or this current situation have resolved to, let's say, more of using arms or different tactics. We've seen how the Iranians retaliated by, shelling Kurdistan in Iraq after some Kurds in Kurdistan, Iran, have carried out a military operation against some of the thugs of security forces there. So is it going to be a continuous? Is it going to stop? I believe we're going to see more in Baluchistan, more in Kurdistan, and definitely in Ahwaz. If this is going to continue at that level, this could be a game changer. But again, we have to be a little bit patient. But the world, media, and every organization need to stand by those people. They are dying there.
All right, Abdallah, hold that thought. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion about the unrest in Iran. We'll also go to Afghanistan, where women there are standing in solidarity with the women of Iran. We'll talk about the uncertainty over the succession to Ayatollah Khamenei and much more. That's coming up next. Don't go away.
Tonight on Global Eye. On the summit, is Europe returning to the 20th century, or are we forcing the 20th century on current reality? On the Sports Corner, breaking the rules the creative way, the Danish football team will be criticizing Qatari human rights. And on the Spotlight, pregnancy is the sole prerogative of a woman, the landmark Indian Supreme Court ruling. All of this and much more on tonight's Global Eye.
We're on the inside of political and religious passions in Jerusalem, breaking down the financial trends shaping the global economy, giving you key context, not just headlines, with the stories from Israel that touch the U.S. and those across the region with impact far beyond its borders. Catch the rundown where the Middle East meets the world.
Welcome back, and we continue our coverage of the protests in Iran. Just how far will they go, and how are Iran's neighbours and the United States preparing for the potential fall of the regime? Well, before we go on, let's take a listen to Iran's hardline President Raisi, who spoke about the unrest yesterday.
There is no doubt about the impact of this lady's death on everyone. This is our administrative and the government's duty and our human duty to follow up on this case. This case will definitely be followed up. And as the person in charge, I told her family that our principle in this case is transparency and justice. For sure, in this case, the forensic medical team, who are professionals, they will investigate the case and announce their findings, and we will wait for that. The red line of the Islamic Republic is the security of people's lives and property. In no way it is allowed that people want to disrupt the society with chaos.
And a reminder, we're joined by Jason Brodsky from United Against a Nuclear Iran, and in Manama tonight, Abdullah Al-Junaid, Bahraini columnist and analyst as well. So, Jason, we just heard from President Raisi there. The unrest does come at a time of uncertainty, doesn't it, surrounding the succession. The 86-year-old Ayatollah, of course, has a lot of health problems. Some speculate that his son is being groomed to take over. Others say it's Raisi himself. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it does come at a critical juncture. Ayatollah Khamenei is 83. He has had several health conditions over the years. There have been reports he had a recent surgery and has been incapacitated, but he has been seen in public on 2 occasions recently. Nevertheless, there are 2 potential candidates to succeed him in the Iranian system. One is Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi, who is the most qualified person in the current Iranian establishment by virtue of resume alone. He was the Chief Justice and is now the president. And then it's his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, who is another potential candidate, who is a shadowy figure, doesn't have much of a public profile, but he's generating one because the protesters have been chanting against Mojtaba on the streets of Iran. So that's something to watch.
Abdullah, what is the feeling in the Gulf countries? How are they preparing for the possible, potential, eventual fall of this regime?
The fall of the regime, definitely, a political vacuum. It's not just going to be is what worries everybody. Would China stand idle? Would Russia stand idle for this vacuum to be filled by somebody like the United States or their ally? For us, definitely, we have a gap, which is the Arabian Gulf. But definitely, countries like Iraq, Kuwait could be in a direct threat to such eventuality. What sort of containment for the situation? It's going to be multi-layered, and it will dictate that the international community is to be ready. But to safeguard such a situation, I believe the Iranian opposition, they need to stand together now and send the Iranian people one message, that they are capable of transitioning Iran should this eventuality take place. At the present time, we have 2 or 3 factions that they are each blaming the other for something that is dead in history. They both need to reconcile fast. And this is the message that everybody needs to send to the Iranian opposition. They're going to continue, each one of them promising himself to rule after this regime collapse. We're going to have a disastrous situation.
Abdullah, thank you. And Jason, what about the US? Is it preparing for the eventual fall of the regime? Is that something that's being talked about seriously?
I don't think U.S. Policymakers view the fall of the regime as being imminent, but there is a simmering level of discontent in the Iranian society that's undeniable. They think the regime is unreformable, and I think that the U.S. is likely looking at contingency planning at the moment. But right now, the focus has to be on isolating the regime and empowering the Iranian people to fulfill their own aspirations. And if the U.S. gets that balance right, it will go a long way in helping rid the United States of its chief problem in the Middle East, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And should Western countries go further in condemning the regime? They've condemned the violence. Do they need to go further in specifically condemning the regime, would you say?
They need to go further. They need to be condemning the violence. They need to be condemning the regime, and they need to be isolating Iran diplomatically. The scenes that we saw last week at the UN General Assembly opening, with Iran's president and his entourage being given a platform to hold press conferences and meetings in New York, was an outrage. And part of the diplomatic isolation campaign needs to be denying entry visas to human rights abusers, refusing meetings, reducing diplomatic presence in Europe, especially shuttering embassies, and kicking Iran out of international organizations. And that would help go a long way in empowering the Iranian people.
Jason Brodsky and Abdullah Al-Junaid, thank you both very much indeed.